We are on week 57 of the life of Christ, moving along at a fast pace. 57 weeks. Last week we discussed Mary and Martha as recorded in Luke. We also talked about how Jesus was emphasizing the importance of our relationship with God over everything else. And the reality is that I think a lot of times in our lives we make everything else more important sometimes than our relationship with God. And I think if we're all honest in here, I think we all have had those days or those weeks or those months or those years for that matter. And we're kind of going over some things in the latter part of Jesus's ministry. We're getting into the second half of his Judean ministry before his death. And we see that Luke also records an instant that Jesus was eating with a Pharisee at a Pharisee's house. And we're going to start that this week. We're going to be in Luke chapter 14. And this was the beginning of a series of parables that Jesus taught during his latter part of his ministry in Judea before his crucifixion. Luke chapter 14, we're going to be in verses 1 through 14 this morning. And that's where we'll be teaching out of, so give everybody an opportunity who wants to turn there. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?" They had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. "When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, 'Give this person your seat.' Then humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up to a better place.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Then Jesus said to his hosts, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Now, there's a whole lot to unpack here if we really wanted to get in depth on it, because truthfully, Jesus is dealing with some very deep-rooted problems within the religious leaders. The people that were there. His audience that day was not normally the followers, those who have been following him everywhere he goes. These were his enemies, if you will, for a lack of a better terminology. And, he's there, and we see that Jesus doesn't play around. He doesn't sit and try to sugarcoat it. He's just straightforward. He does what he has to do to try to make a point, try to get them. Listen, church, I'm tired of the namby-pamby preachers that want to just tickle people's ears because they think that that's what the people need to hear. Don't get me wrong. There are some things that are great. Being told how we're overcomers, being told that we're victorious, being told that we're, the grace of God and the love of God. All of those things are wonderful teachings. And in fact, to be honest with you, I think we need to have that balance in the church. But we have gone to the point where we compromise the truth. And then we have people who sit back and think that they can just live however they want, and they're going to heaven. And those people's blood will be on those preachers' hands. I mean, that's just a fact. And there's a whole thing that's going on here. And, you know, the reality is that the people that he was talking to were the people that should have been accepting him, but they didn't. They should have understood who he was, but they didn't. They should have not been there as enemy, but they were. And so, as we've seen throughout Jesus' ministry, they're doing their best to try to trip him up. Now, he's been invited to a feast at the home of a prominent Pharisee, and just like the tax collector, he didn't have a bit of problem going there. And truthfully, you know, they made a big deal about him going to the tax collector's home, because why would he eat with sinners and tax collectors? But, you know, I could, if you looked at it from Jesus' point of view, why would I sit and eat with a bunch of Pharisees? I mean, you think about it, he could have very easily have said that. Why would I go eat with you? I'd rather go eat with the tax collectors and the sinners, because at least they're being honest about who they are. You, on the other hand, think you're something that you're not. He didn't do that. He's got invited, and he equal opportunity. He walked in. Jesus took the opportunity to minister to whom he had the opportunity to minister to. I often said, whenever I was younger, when I first started preaching and everything, I often said I would never turn a speaking engagement down. Someone come to me and asked me to come preach at their church. That means if I walk into the church on Sunday morning and the pastor walks up to me and says, I'm going to let you preach this morning, I wouldn't turn it down. That's just the way I always was. And the reason being is because I honestly felt that if it happens, that God was giving me an opportunity to preach the word, and I needed to be obedient to that. See, we need to be open to opportunities to share the gospel, and we have to understand that sometimes sharing the gospel to one person has to be done differently than it is to another. You know, you know, if you're a street preacher and you're out preaching on the street, you're going to be very forthright, and people are going to label you as crazy. And a lot of street preachers are crazy. You about have to be crazy to be a street preacher. And I'm not meaning that as an insult on street preachers. I've known some street preachers in my lifetime that God just basically used for great works, and I just sat back and go, man, you know, John the Baptist would have made a great street preacher. I mean, seriously. He'd been standing up there, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All of you all are going to hell. You need to get your lives right with God. I mean, that's the kind of preacher John the Baptist would do. So here Jesus has been invited to the feast of the home of a prominent Pharisee, and he doesn't play games with them. He knows what's up. He's dealt with these enough. And this was a setup. I honestly think that the Pharisee invited him for the purpose of setting him up to fail, so they could have a reason to arrest him. That's the whole point. If you look at verse 1, it says he was being carefully watched. Now, have you ever been somewhere that you carefully watched by somebody? I went into a Radio Shack when Radio Shack was big. They had them in the mall. Remember, I had them in the malls and some malls. I went into a Radio Shack one time to do some shopping, and I watched. Sales rep followed me all the way around the store. Now, there's two reasons why that sales rep was following me around the store. The first reason was because they were commissioned salesmen. So they're there to pounce on somebody that they think is going to be a customer. But he never approached me. So my first thought would have been he's doing it because he's a salesman. Then I realized he wasn't doing it because he was a salesman, but he was suspicious. And he was watching. Now, I know you all laugh because some of you all think I'm suspicious anyway. But he was, you know, worried that I might go in there and steal something. I wasn't wearing a trench overcoat. I didn't look the part of a thief. I just going in shopping. And I actually, honestly, I wasn't going to spend no money because I was broke. Okay, I just come in there and I come in to do the shopping. But, you know, he carefully watched me. I work in retail, and we have in the stores that I work in, they have guys that are called LP, loss prevention, and their job is to go around watching and catch thieves in the store. And you can watch them. I know, of course, I know who they are because I've met them and talked to them and, and had conversations with them. But you watch them in the store and you'll see them pop around a corner and look around. You know what's up. They got their eye on somebody, carefully watching. That's what's happening here. He's being carefully watched. And there's a sick man there. Now, first of all, number one, the Pharisees didn't really want sick people around them. They considered them not a good thing. In fact, even in the temple, they weren't allowed to be in certain parts of the temple because of impurities. That's a long story. We won't want to get into all that. But so they're having this feast, and there's a man there that has an obvious problem because he has abnormal swelling in his body. So it's obvious this man's sick. Can you say plant? They planted him there for a purpose. They didn't invite this man because he had a place of honor and they wanted him to be, honored or be a part of the whole dinner. They invited this man as a spectacle because they were going to try to trick Jesus up. And here this man is sitting there. He is abnormal swelling. And I like the way Jesus does it. Here it is. It's also the Sabbath. And the Pharisees wanted to see just exactly what Jesus would do, it being the Sabbath. Because this isn't the first time that they've run into or had controversy with him about healing on the Sabbath. So, you would think by now they would be over this, but they're not. They're going to keep pushing it. But we also have to realize that the Pharisees weren't the only ones that's watching closely. It's somebody else doing some close watching. If you look at verse 7 of this chapter, Jesus took notice of how the guests took the places of honor. He was watching them. Now, Jesus sees the sick man at the feast. He knew he was being set up, so he controls the narrative. He doesn't let them manipulate him into it. He just takes it over and controls the narrative. Before any moves are made, he asked the Pharisees, he says, let me ask you, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Just took the teeth out of their argument. Didn't he? Now, I'm curious, guys. Can you tell me, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And what I think is really interesting here is they never answered.
Well,
they couldn't. The onus was on them. And if they said no, they were in a bad light. If they said yes, they were in a bad light. There was no right answer. Men, have you ever been asked a question by your wife and you know that you cannot say yes, no, maybe, or anything in between? The only thing you can do is say, okay, dear. Mm-hmm. Been there. We've all been there. I got grounded from going anywhere while I had a leg broke because I just talked. But, I learned the hard way that sometimes I just need to just shut up. And the truth is, I probably ain't learned that lesson yet. And they just sat there and they had there was no answer they could give. So then Jesus, after he asked them, is it lawful to heal? He turns the tables on them, giving them opportunity to implicate themselves. And they can't do that. They're not going to do that. So they're just kind of just silent. And then the Pharisees, unable to respond, the trap's been turned. The trap that was meant for him is now is trapping them. And Jesus then reaches out, heals the man, and sends him away. Jesus sent him away because he knew the man wasn't there to eat. He was a plant. The man probably was uncomfortable. You ever been somewhere you were uncomfortable, didn't feel like you were really invited? Don't mention your in-laws. Okay? Don't mention your outlaws. Don't mention the pastor. There are times that, you go someplace and you just know that it's really not your place. I won't mention who, but I have some people in my life, that honestly, I've been to their homes more than once because I've had to be. And I just basically sat there in the corner and, don't say a word because I know that I really just ain't welcome. And the truth of the matter is, they've never said anything to make me feel unwelcome. I just know, I can tell as soon as I walk through the door. I'm just like, you know what? I got to be here, and you got to put up with me. And I don't really want to fight with you about it, because I'm afraid if you do the wrong thing, I'm going to fight with you about it. It's not because I'm scared of them. It's because I'm scared of what I'm going to say or do. And then I'm going to make it hard on the other people that I'm with, so I don't want to do that to them. So you go places you're not invited. As soon as the person I'm with says, it's time to go, I'm the first one out the door. Yeah. So he heals him and he sends him on his way. And then he turns around and he confronts the religious leaders. If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath, will you not immediately pull it out? Again, they can't answer it. Because if they answer it one way, they implicate themselves. If they answer it another, then they also are in trouble. So Jesus is pointing out the important principle of the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath is meant to be a day of rest and worship. That's the whole point of it. But it should not hinder the act of helping those who are in need. And that's what he's trying to point out to them. So he's making the point. There's need here. We need to take care of the need. Yes, we don't want to dishonor the Sabbath. We want to worship God. We want to rest. But we also need to take care of those in need. So if you've got a child or an ox that's fallen into a well, what are you going to do? You're going to break the Sabbath and you're going to go pull them out. You can't look at them and say, well, you got to wait till sundown. Then we'll come in there and then we'll get you out of there. Here's your little food and water. Keep you. You don't need water. You're in a well. Here's you some food.
Especially it depends on which child it is, I guess.
Yeah, it depends on what child it is. If I was your child, you would just close the well up, seal it up, and say, okay, goodbye.
I mean, you ain't wrong.
I ain't wrong. But so basically you're going to reach out, you're going to help them. And they were just basically speechless. They just couldn't say anything. And we got to remember that Jesus had been paying real close attention. He knew what was going on before it ever happened. He walked into the room. He knew what was happening. He put it in his place. I'm sure at this point in time, his welcome is being worn out. But, he ain't left yet. He ain't done. He begins to, he's angry with the Pharisees for what has happened. He's not happy with them. And he doesn't back down from the truth. Instead, he calls them out for their own unrighteousness at this point. He teaches them three principles: the importance of humility. He condemns pride and ungratefulness. And then he emphasizes the importance of doing good for others instead of doing things to look good to others. He looks around and he notices that the people are taking places of honor. Now, we're not as big on that in America, although we do have circumstances and places where you see that. We don't do that here at this church. I've been in churches where they would have they would set the banquet area up as like a U shape, and then they would have a head table at the front, and that would be where the pastor and the guest speaker and whomever and then everybody else would sit at the other tables. But I don't do that here. I just don't. I don't condemn those that do that. I just, unless we're having something special, we're honoring somebody, like a wedding. You got a husband and a wife just get married. They should be in the place of honor. You put them at the table that is at the head of everything because it's a place of honor. But in a lot of cultures, you see this, that there are places of honor to sit and play, and, in the church, sometimes we in churches, try to have places of honor, and we don't here. It's not our intention ever. And so the thing is that, that's just a cultural thing in different places. And he was noticing that, certain people were coming in and assuming places of honor. They weren't told to sit there. There wasn't a nameplate there for them. They just come in and they were this particular leader or whoever, and they said, I get this place. Now, what would be really embarrassing is that if you come in and you sit down, and then you're sitting at the head table, if you will, and then someone walks up to you and says, I'm sorry, but this seat was meant for somebody else. I need you to take your seat down here with the rest of the crowd. It would be kind of embarrassing, humiliating, wouldn't it? Because, you especially if you are a person of honor and you know that you deserve to be in a place of honor, but here's the thing. We have a tendency in our life to think that we deserve something that we may not be deserving of. We are proud and arrogant and thinking that we belong up there whenever it might be meant for somebody else. So he points out, you notice they're choosing the place of honor. And he points out their arrogance and ungratefulness by, you're just assuming that this is your spot. But when invited to a wedding feast, he says you shouldn't take the place of honor because someone more distinguished than you may have been invited. And then he goes on in this passage and says this would end in you being humiliated because you would have to get up and move to a lower place to make way for the guest with more honor. You go to a wedding people, you're not going to go sit at the seat that says bride and groom unless you are the bride and groom, huh? If you do, somebody's going to come up and say, we need you to move. This is the bride and groom's table, and you aren't either of those. Well, I was 20 years ago. Well, I don't care. Today is about them, not you. It's their place of honor. You may be an honorable person, but you don't assume that role. And see, that's the thing. In the church, a lot of times we have mindsets that, well, we're Christians, so we're honorable people, so we deserve the front row, or we deserve this place. Or in Heather's case, we think the back row is the most holy. It's just like school, church. If you sit down the back row, you're always the troublemaker. You sit on the front row, you're always the good guy. Bridget, I'm sorry. I'm not sure you fall in the right category. I'm kidding.
She's the one that got the end of the line.
He basically tells them it's better for you to take the lower place at the table. Assume a place of less honor. And then if the host sees you there and you deserve that other place and he puts you there, you are then being lifted up. You're being honored, not humiliated. I went to a church in Springfield, Missouri when I went to college there. It's the only time I went to that church. I watched. There was a lady come in and she sat down. There were some people sat down in this pew, and this lady come down and she walked over and they were sitting in her spot. And then she gets up and she walks around the church for a minute, and then she goes up to the pastor's wife and has a talk with her. And the pastor's wife went back there and told the people, we need you to move. This is her spot. I never went back to that church. Never did. And interesting enough, the church's name was Friendship Assembly of God. There wasn't a lot of friendship going on there. We need to be willing to humble ourselves instead of trying to lift ourselves up. And he was telling them, if you deserve more honor, then the host will come and move you. But for all those that exalt themselves, you'll be humbled. And all those who humble themselves will be exalted. And then he confronted the host of the feast. He said, hey, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, you know what? You really shouldn't invite your brothers and your friends and your sisters or your relatives or your rich neighbors. How many have ever had a party at your house? And I'm not talking about alcohol. I'm just saying a party of some sort. You know, you've cake or ice cream, I don't know, cookout, whatever. You've invited a bunch of people over. Now, I don't know that much of us would be this way, but a lot of times you'll see people will throw parties because they know they'll get invited to parties. Huh? They'll throw it. There are people who do that. They'll throw a party, and they'll get invited to another person's party. You know, and it costs hundreds of dollars or whatever to feed all the people that you bring in and all this stuff. You know, we do birthday parties. I tell you what, I've never understood this. You throw a birthday party for somebody. You spend all this money out and invite all these people. Why am I spending all this money on my own birthday party? Why aren't these people paying for my birthday party? Don't make no sense. I know. I'm thinking, okay. But the reality is a lot of times people do these parties just for the purpose of being invited to a party. So you spend hundreds of dollars and then you invite these people and then all these people invite you over and then you get free meals from them. And so you eventually get paid back. And that's the mindset a lot of these had. We're going to throw these to-dos and I invite you to my house this Sunday. You invite me to your house next Sunday. And then we just keep doing the rounds back and forth till everybody's been paid back.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Allison said nobody is invited to my house, and I'm not going to yours. She's a recluse. Y'all got her and what's his name? Howard Hughes have something in common. They like to stay away from people. She's not a drink. Huh?
To remind me why I don't do it all.
Yeah, party her down in the right way you move her. So, you know, that's what some people will do. And he's like, why are you inviting all these people that you know are just going to invite you? You're not making any kind of a sacrifice when you do this. Instead, he tells them, you're not doing it out of the kindness of your heart or for the good of those who you invite, because they'll repay you by inviting you to their feasts. He said, but a good deed would be to invite the poor, to the cripple, the lame, and the blind. We did the food giveaway last month. It was last month, wasn't it? We did the food giveaway last month. We set up a table out there. They put the boxes of food on there. People drove by, saw the sign, pulled in, picked up food. We had one guy pulled in. And honestly, I don't think he came because it was free food. I think he came because it was food. I think he was a single man. And I may be wrong, but he looked like he was a single man. He got one meal. And he was just, you know, he come in there and he's like, hey, y'all want some money for this? Now, you know, honestly, if he wanted to give, okay, that's fine. But nobody was asking him to give. We weren't going to do that. We weren't going to push the idea. No way, shape, or form. And they're like, no, this is free. Are you sure? Yeah, this is free. You just go on. And, you know, I appreciated the fact that he asked. But we weren't doing it to get something from somebody. We were doing it to give. When you do something like that, you do it to give, not to get. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, don't even do it to get a reward from God or anybody else. You do it because you care. Amen? Amen. People see through the garbage. Yeah. God loves a cheerful giver. Yeah, it's got to come from the heart. Giving is something that we should be willingly doing, not something that we're forced to do. And I joked around with him. I said, well, if you want to give $1 million, we'll take it. And I think Everett told him, said he ain't worth $1 million. Don't do it. But here's the thing, church. We do stuff a lot of times for our own selfish reasons. A good deed would be to invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Well, they had invited a sick man. So, did they do their good deed? No. They'd invited the sick man not to help him, but for selfish purposes. They invited people of prominence for their own selfish gain. Hey, that can drop the list of people that showed up at my party. Jesus tells them, when you invite someone who is in need and can't repay you, that is when you'll be blessed. You'll receive your reward eternally at the resurrection of the righteous. And it's at this point that Jesus begins to tell them, when one of those at the table with him heard this, it's at this point that Jesus begins to give them a parable. And I'm at the end of this, so I'm going to have to stop. I'm right at time, so I might as well just stop right here. But he begins to talk about a parable, and it's the parable of the great banquet. And this is going into a whole lesson about eternity and spending time with God and what it's going to take. And one of them at the table hears him talking, and it says in verse 15 of Luke chapter 14, when one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." And you would think, oh, listen to that. Somebody's finally got it. Jesus saw through it. He saw that they hadn't finally got it. Because they all assumed, because they were Jews, that they had that right. But they did not have the right to be at the kingdom because they had already refused the reason that gave them the right. And we'll get into the teaching on that parable next week and then get into some of those other parables. I don't have time to get through that. That's too much material to try to finish up before church. Any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Is this a parking lot question or is this a...
No.
I'm kidding.
To what you've been saying, I can't think of the word. So earlier, what you were saying about if you ever been invited to somebody's house, you didn't feel welcome to. The ex-friend that I had, she had this thing about telling everybody my life story without my permission, and then she would make me look bad, so I wouldn't have any other friends. So she'd be my only friend, and when she would take me to people's houses that she's talked about me to, I would instantly feel uncomfortable, and you could just see or feel the feelings towards me. And I was the first one out the door, but I understand I'm reclusive too. I don't like to leave my house either because of that reason. Because of all the times that I've had bad people in my life, it's made me like.
And we see that Jesus, in this whole situation, Jesus was invited for a purpose. He wasn't invited because they felt like he was a person to honor. They were there to make a spectacle of him. And, and the truth of the matter is, most of us have been at least somewhere along the line, been in that spot. They've been very uncomfortable. I'm that way in a circumstance right now all the time whenever I'm put in certain places. And in fact, my wife even feels the same way. And it's tough. You got to be there, but you're not really welcome to be there. And that's not speaking for everybody at the place. As one individual that makes you feel that way. But that's all it takes sometimes. But you know what? What's great is that Jesus welcomes us all. But we've got to be willing to do and be what he wants us to be. Or otherwise you will be cast out just like everybody else, because you've got to have that relationship with God. And that's some of what we'll get into more when we get into next week's part of this lesson. Anybody else? All right. God bless.